Spells. Much like everything else in Clash of Clans, sometimes it can be a bit too powerful. Today, I wanted to dive into the history of each and every spell and take a look at when they were at their strongest. Now, spoiler alert, about half of the spells in the game are currently in their prime, so I'm only going to be touching on those very briefly and focus more on the spells that used to be stronger. Anyways, with that being said, let's get right into it.
Let's do this.
Lightning spell. Being one of the first spells added to the game, it's bound to have a very long list of balances, and it does. But we don't need to start from the beginning. Most of you know the Lightning excelled at stealing Dark Elixir before storages had spell protection back in the day. And if it wasn't for its buffs and a shift in the meta in recent years, I would have said that was its peak. However, on June 22nd, 2020, it received a rework that felt more like a buff than anything else. It essentially went from a Lightning in Clash Royale to a zap spell, but with the same damage as before. The now more precise Lightning spell was now better than ever. In fact, it may have been a little too strong, as destroying the clan castle with it became a viable strategy from the spell's rework between June 2020 all the way to December 2020 when clan castles got spell protection. It was during this time when I would say the Lightning spell peaked, as it was dominating the meta for the better or worse. But ever since those changes, the spell has remained the same. Heal spell. Like all spells, the healing spell had its ups and downs. Actually, more downs than ups, but it's never been broken or anything, and unsurprisingly, it's currently in its prime. Ever since they removed the Inferno Tower's ability to block healing effects in December 2017, it's been shining ever since. Rage spell. Surprisingly, the Rage spell has remained almost the exact same throughout its entire history, but that's probably a good thing because a Rage spell being too strong is not good for anybody. In fact, that's what players thought of the max level Rage from September 2012 to January 2014. At the time, the damage increase for a level 5 Rage, which by the way maxes at Town Hall 8, was 180%, the equivalent to today's max level that you unlock at Town Hall 12. For its time, the Rage was simply way too good. There's no other way to put it. It gave Rage troops too much power, and during these times, the Rage spell would peak. But on January 29th, 2014, this would be decreased to 170%, where over a decade later remains the same for a level 5 Rage. Jump spell. Much like the heal spell, the jump spell today is wildly better than it once was. It went through a number of reworks in its early years, one of the most notable ones being that the spell could now influence a troop's pathing, making it so that troops would actually use the spell. It's been great ever since. Freeze spell. Although some may argue that its pre-2018 version where it was 2 housing space and lasted longer was better, because of that change, the freeze became more versatile and it's arguably the best it's ever been. Other than that one rework though, literally none of its stats have ever been touched. Santa Surprise. The first temporary spell available in 2012, 2016, and basically every year after that, except for 2023. The spell has always been known to drop a big bomb on the village that did decent damage. However, nothing will ever top the Santa Surprise at its peak. In 2012, it was dealing 1500 damage no matter what town hall you were at. That meant you could one-shot clan castles and 3-shot any town hall you encountered. The spell was absolutely busted, so much that they ended up increasing the HP of the clan castle as an emergency nerf to the spell. That's how powerful it was. In the spell's return in 2016, it now scaled based off what town hall you were at, but even then, at max level, it barely did half the damage it did before. It was buffed a number of times over the years, but it never came close to how broken it was at its peak. Clone spell. I'm just gonna go through this one pretty quick because it's undoubtedly in its prime and it could still get better. The clone absolutely sucked balls back in the day, taking up 4 housing space and being way worse than it is today. Trust me, you're better off using today's clone than any of its previous balances. Invisibility spell. Fun fact about this one, there's been 0 changes to it since it was added in December 2020. However, it was broken in some way at launch, mainly from bugs that prevented it from being used properly. Not exactly broken as in OP, but literally broken. It had issues with properly hiding certain troops, buildings, and had weird spell interactions mainly with the clone spell. It took a few months before all of this was fixed, but overall, the spell is better today. The Recall spell. The Recall had a pretty underwhelming launch due to its niche use cases. With that being said though, it is better today due to a buff in January 2023, where the capacity it could recall was increased by 11 for all levels. Poison spell. The poison has been through a lot. Nerfs, buffs, reworks, the whole shebang. And even though I'd say the poison is in a better place today, nothing will ever come close to how powerful it was in 2015, and this was mostly due to its interactions with clan castle troops. When the poison spell was added, you could simply lure troops out of the clan castle, drop a poison, and that was it. That was the entire dealing with the clan castle portion of the game. And obviously this was terrible because it made clan castle troops totally irrelevant and useless. From its addition in July 2015 to March 2016 when they changed clan castle troops interactions, I'd say this is when the poison was at its peak in terms of how OP it was. Earthquake. Getting right to the point, it's absolutely better. In fact, the next two spells are at their best, so I'm going to try and run through them quickly. As for the Earthquake, ever since it was reworked in September 2015 and buffed in June 2019, increasing its radius, the Earthquake has never been better. In fact, some may say it gives you too much value. For the Haste spell, much like the Invisibility spell, it's had 0 changes done to it, so right out the box, it's been pretty good. And for the Skeleton spell, it's been reworked twice, and its current version seems to be the best. When they changed the skeletons to guards while also buffing it to spawn the same amount of skeletons as before, that made it significantly better, and it went from a useless spell to actually quite decent if you need it today. Bat spell. Okay, now we're changing gears here because the Bat spell probably had one of the most broken launches in Clash of Clans history. The Bat spell spawns quite the amount of bats, and if you use the spell, it definitely feels like there's more than enough. However, at launch, the spell spawned almost double the bats it does today at certain levels, and it was just as OP as it sounds. From its addition in December 2018 to January 2019, the Bat spell would get nerfed twice, and it was during this time when it was the strongest. However, after the nerfs, there were still problems with the spell. There was a bug that allowed any clone bats to do full damage to storages and town halls, which wasn't supposed to happen, by the way, because normal bats deal less damage to those buildings. But after the nerfs and bug fixes, I'd still say the spell is strong, but certainly not at the level it was in its peak. Overgrowth spell. This was literally just added, so no changes whatsoever, and I don't really have an idea if it'll get nerfed or buffed. Only time will tell, I guess, but so far, it's the best it's ever been, obviously. Bag of Frostmites. Introduced in the Cookie Rumble event on December 18th, 2023, the Bag of Frostmites was a temporary spell that was basically a free spell, but with additional Frostmites that spawned from it. These Frostmites targeted defenses and slowed them down for quite a bit. So basically, if you had enough of these spells, you'd make an entire base very weak as everything attacked really slow. It was pretty good at its job. I mean, too good apparently, because just 3 days later, it was nerfed pretty heavily, reducing the Frostmite spawn count, the time it took for them to spawn, the duration of the spell, and also reducing the slowdown effects. It was pretty alright after the nerf, but if it ever returns, it will never be as good as that. Clan Capital Healing Spell. Although it's not a terrible spell today, it was better and it had to be nerfed a couple of times. When it was added, the spell felt like it healed too much. It was also pretty popular when paired with siege cards, as their destroyed state could also be healed, thus leading them to hang around for too long. It was way too OP and also a boring meta. But it was during this time from May 2nd, 2022 to the end of June when the heal spell was at its strongest state. The nerfs were pretty rough and it doesn't keep up at the upper levels anymore, but I believe the spell remains pretty decent for those lower levels. Clan Capital Jump Spell. In October 2023, its housing space went from 2 to 1, making it a much better choice for any army out there. It wasn't necessarily bad before, it just didn't feel worth the housing space in such a large map. Also, it just let your troops jump. There was way better spells. But after that housing space change, it's been the best it's ever been. Clan Capital Rage spell. The Rage has always been a pretty powerful spell both in the home village and clan capital, and weirdly enough, both received similar nerfs. From its addition in May 2022 to the end of June 2022, the Rage boosted 20% more damage to troops than it does today, and for a short while, it was pretty dang powerful. A level 1 Rage back then was equivalent to a level 3 today in terms of its damage boosted, and you could definitely feel the difference. But it was just one of those necessary changes. It will never reach that level, and probably a good thing. After the nerf, it's been untouched since then. Clan Capital Lightning spell. It is slightly better than it was before, as in September 2023, it got a small buff to its damage at all levels. Much like some other spells on the list though, it is in its prime right now, but it could be better. Graveyard spell. So far, the Graveyard spell is the clan capital spell with the most balances, and they were all nerfs. It had a very similar issue to the Bat spell, where it simply spawned too many skeletons, and when paired with the Battle Ram, it quickly became the most OP strategy at the time. Or actually, of all time in the clan capital, I'm not sure. Maybe Super Miners topped that, I'm not sure. The Graveyard probably had the craziest peak of all spells in the game. Added in December 12, 2022, just over a week later, it received its first nerf. But even that wasn't enough, as it was nerfed again in January 2023, and yet again in September 2023. It's safe to say the Graveyard will never be as good as it was at launch, but I believe it's still a decent spell. Frost spell. Much like the jump spell, it was okay before, but it's now even better as its housing space was reduced from 4 to 3, making its current version the best. Endless Haste spell. Being a new spell, it's automatically the best it's ever been, much like the Overgrowth spell. I also think it's too early to determine if it'll be buffed or nerfed, but overall, it's a decent spell. So yeah, that is every spell in the game. I kind of want to do this for troops and other stuff in the game as well, so let me know what topics you'd want to see. I feel like there's definitely some interesting things I could talk about, so yeah. With that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and as always, thanks for watching. Havoc Gaming out. Peace!